Okay, we are live. It's been kind of back-to-back episodes here this week with Cayle Sharrock of Sharrock. Is that correct? I'm horrible with these names. Cayle Sharrock of Tari Labs. I believe you're the chief engineer.
Yeah, I sort of head up the engineering team here in Johannesburg. But we don't go by too many fancy titles.
Now, we had met at the Magical Crypto Conference. We actually did a short interview there, and I thought it was great, but unfortunately, nobody else could hear it because I think our microphone was unplugged during that one. We were fortunate enough where all our other interviews kind of came out okay. We've since fixed our sound quality, by the way, because we have the Denver MoneroCon coming up, so we're hoping to have better sound and video quality there. But I didn't want to lose all that good information, so. Cayle was kind enough to agree to come on again. Basically going to be the same interview unless there's any new insights from 3 weeks ago. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of get the overrun of Tari Labs for the Monero community. It's always kind of been a little bit of a mystery. For those of you who aren't familiar, I don't know how long ago it was now when Fluffy Pony made the announcement that he was going to start up Tari Labs. I guess was that a year ago now, or it's all a blur in crypto land.
You know what? I don't know when he made the announcement, but I've been involved for just on a year.
Okay.
And I mean, it's been a fun ride. We spent the first 6 months trying to build up a team. It's not like there are blockchain developers just kind of wandering aimlessly around the streets of Johannesburg. That's been a fun adventure, like basically hiring the smartest people we can and not necessarily requiring a lot of blockchain experience, but hiring very smart people who are able to learn quickly and come sometimes with a fresh angle on things has been a pretty exciting journey so far.
Yeah, and so when Fluffy kind of made that announcement initially, it was explained as being he was going to go off and build this kind of second layer to Monero is what it's kind of been described as. And when we spoke last time, and that could be my misinterpretation of what he was saying as well. But when we spoke last time, I think you kind of gave me a more clear understanding of what it is. So it's a merge mined side chain. It's going to be merge mined with Monero, but it's not like a Lightning network on top of Monero. It's its own blockchain, right? It's its own coin. It just happens to be merge mined with Monero. So maybe you could just go into that a little bit more, kind of describing what exactly Tari is in terms of its architecture and how it relates to Monero.
Yeah, sure. The architecture of Tari is really what the community decides it should be, but there's a fair amount of influence and direction coming from Fluffy and Tari Labs, and what the current thinking, and we're fairly far down this road now, is that it's a merge mined coin on Monero based on Mimblewimble. And the reason we chose Mimblewimble is that it really has it has good privacy features. It's a compact blockchain, and it's got some very interesting properties that allow you to do interesting things from payments channels point of view, and ultimately the digital assets network that we want to build. And digital assets is really the focus of Tari. The Mimblewimble cryptocurrency is almost like the point of departure. Once we launch that, it's almost like we're beginning the Tari journey and building this digital assets network. And when I say digital assets, I mean things like purely native digital items that exist and die in the digital space, things like tickets, loyalty points, collectibles, card games, things like that you get CryptoKitties on Ethereum and so on. And that's the exciting part of Tari, and that's where we are headed.
Right. So, but it's not that, but it's its own. It is. So, is it closer to an Ethereum than a Monero? Is that fair to say?
It is a little bit different. I mean, so look, the part that's merge mined with Monero is a standard cryptocurrency proof of work coin. In fact, it's very similar to Grenell Beam because it's Mimblewimble. The only real difference is that Tari won't have its own proof of work. It'll be merge mined with Monero, which means that Monero miners that opt in will get free Tari along with Monero. So depending how you define what a sidechain is, that would be the sidechain element of Tari on Monero, is that miners mining Tari, Monero miners will basically get Tari for free as a result of merge mining it. Then the cryptocurrency itself lives a life of its own. So that, it's another definition of sidechains is where you will peg out the parent chain and lock it up, and you create the sidechain coins as a result of that. That doesn't happen with Monero and Tari. You don't have to lock up Monero to create or obtain Tari. You will obtain them via mining or buying them on an exchange or trading them or what have you in the usual way. So hopefully that clears it up a little bit.
Okay.
And some of the nomenclature around what a sidechain is.
I'm trying to. What's the RS? RSK on Bitcoin? Is that that runs on top of Bitcoin? Is that the one that I'm thinking? I'm looking it up right now.
Yeah. So
smart contract. Is that kind of similar, or is that?
Yes. That is a much closer. Yeah. It's a counterparty. Ricardo's mentioned Tari being the sort of spiritual successor to counterparty on Monero. It's more along those lines than an Ethereum, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And RSK is kind of similar to because RSK I think is merge mined right with Bitcoin. I'm trying to.
Yeah. So Rootstock is a federated, as I understand it. I may be wrong, but it's a federated sidechain of Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So it's somewhat. I mean, I think it's somewhat similar. It's like closer to that than a Lightning network. Okay. Or Ethereum, but it's kind of its own beast. From a philosophical point of view, we have certain objectives that we want to achieve. We want to make it useful to everyday people. And so that kind of precludes things like following the Ethereum route. Okay, so if you take a step back and say, what is Ethereum? Well, I always liken Ethereum to someone playing a computer game, and your computer has to take a snapshot of your entire memory state at every clock cycle. Like every time something happens in the game, it has to save the whole state of the game to memory and keep it forever, right? And it does this every single time. And not only that, every computer in the world needs to keep a copy of your memory state every time it changes, which sounds crazy, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, if you're running a little loyalty coupon for your restaurant or your small business, why should, you don't need the security of every single computer in the world maintaining the state of your smart contract. So Tari eschews that kind of global computer thinking. And we explicitly want to sacrifice a little bit of decentralization to obtain usability and speed. Because as we know, like anything that gains any kind of traction on Ethereum just grinds the whole thing to a halt. Like CryptoKitties got popular for a couple of weeks, boom, you couldn't do anything else on Ethereum. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's going away. I think that's a fundamental flaw in the design of Ethereum. The Tari Digital Assets Network looks at it, puts it on its head a little bit and says, well, what do people want to use while still being backed by a highly secure, decentralized network like a proof of work cryptocurrency?
Right. So Monero is where you're getting your decentralization from, right? It's backed. Is that fair to say? I mean, it's merge mine.
You're getting your security from Monero, right? From the proof of work. So the Tari Mimblewimble coin, which let's call it just the Tari coin, gets its proof of work security from Monero. Mm-hmm. And everything that you can say about a proof of work blockchain, immutability, decentralization, uncensorability, is transferred over to the Tari token coin.
So why would you say it's less decentralized then? I mean, just because it's
that is not less decentralized. Yeah. So the actual digital assets get operated on a second layer. And so the idea is that we have these what we call validator nodes. They are basically servers running and managing state of smart contracts on behalf of the digital asset issuers. And in order to incentivize those servers to run, they get paid in Tari. And the sacrifice in decentralization is that a digital asset issuer can say, I only want 3 or 4 of these validator nodes to manage the state of my contract for me. I don't want every single node in the entire network. It's almost like a slider. You can decide how much decentralization you want. You say, well, you can say, I want 100 of these things and be very decentralized. Then it's not going to be very fast and it's going to be a bit more expensive. Or you can say, well, I only want 1 or 2. And in fact, I may even trust those nodes because I run them myself, in which case you can expect to have very high throughput, like thousands of transactions per second, because it's almost like running a traditional AWS full stack service, right? But it's backed by a proof of work blockchain. So you have this kind of fallback to the security of the Tari token in the event anything goes wrong. So it's quite an interesting hybrid of many different ideas.
So the Monero miners, some of them will opt in to mining Tari as well, right? There's really no reason for them not to. Is that the idea?
I mean, yeah, it's like zero marginal extra effort, and you get free Tari. So
you get free Tari.
The hope is that essentially all Monero miners opt in.
Okay,
but we'll see.
And then you have the miners that are securing Monero, and at the same time they're securing Tari. But then you also have these nodes that are kind of almost federated, that are the ones that are then okay.
Yes.
And but there could be as many, and those nodes are getting paid as well, essentially for running and running the smart contracts, essentially.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
And how do they get paid? Based on like what? Based on how much computing power what's the
Yeah, so it'll be somewhat driven by the free market, but that is that every single thing that happens on a smart contract, we call them instructions. So any state change, creating an asset, transferring an asset, redeeming a ticket that'll result in a state change. Anything that gets anything that is within the scope of the smart contract, there will be a tiny fee associated with that. So validator nodes will be, it's basically, validator nodes is almost like smart contracts as a service kind of idea. And you spin them up, you kind of bid for smart contracts to manage. If you get awarded them, you can expect to earn fees for running and maintaining the state of that smart contract, which which either will be paid by the digital asset issuer or by users, depending.
Okay. And then so how does the rewards work? So miners are going to get rewarded for mining, and then what's the issuance rate, and what's the incentive for these nodes to start? Is there an incentive to start early versus starting later? Is there do you see this becoming something where people will naturally start running nodes? Like, is that an incentive there, or is it more of who's going to be running these nodes? Is it?
Well, running the nodes is totally permissionless. So anybody will be able to spin up a node and run it. And I mean, we want to try and get the incentives right so that you could do this as a business. Like, you spin up a node and you get compensated enough that you pay for your electricity and your servers and what have you, and earn a small return on that, right? It's really too early to say exactly how that's going to play out, but generally, I like to leave things to the free market, and that prices reach an equilibrium just based on free market principles. So if there are a lot of digital asset issuers that are trying to issue assets, and there are very few validator nodes, the price for managing smart contracts will be high, which should incentivize more validator nodes to come on board, because it's, as I said, it's totally permissionless, it's very low barriers to entry, and that should push the price down. On the other hand, if there's tons of validator nodes, then it's very cheap to issue digital assets, and then hopefully that encourages people to issue assets on the Tari network. I think it's also pertinent to mention that we're also dog feeding this whole process by implementing a ticketing business on top of the Tari network. It's called Big Neon, and it's currently operating and selling tickets and doing fairly well at the moment on a centralized basis. And once the digital assets network is live, we will migrate the system over onto the blockchain.
So you guys will be like the first ones running most of the nodes, obviously, essentially, right? And then
well, I mean, the validator nodes themselves could be run by anyone. So it's almost like you're saying, all right, I have a digital asset, but I don't really want to invest in infrastructure for this. I'm just going to outsource the whole blockchain, state management system, and everything to validator nodes, and basically pay them for that in Tari. That's the model. There's nothing stopping me from running my own node and selecting that node to be the validator node that manages that asset. It all depends on what you want as a digital asset issuer. So there's lots of choice. There's lots of ways you can run this. As I said before, you can choose to have control, or you can choose to have decentralization and throw it out to the world, depending on what your use case is. If you don't care about decentralization, because remember, decentralization is not the be all and end all, right? A lot of things work perfectly well on a centralized basis, and the Tari network understands that and lets you choose based on what your needs are.
Right. CryptoKitties really doesn't need to be censorship resistant on such a high level.
Precisely. But I mean, if you're doing if you want to do like some sort of something that's politically sensitive, or and you're worried about censorship, then throw it out and throw it out to many nodes and take the performance hit. I mean, obviously, the more nodes you have that have to reach consensus about things, you're going to it's going to be slower. So you've got this this trade-off between decentralization and speed.
Right.
But we don't prescribe anything to digital asset issuers. We just say, these are the trade-offs. That's not something that you can get around. It's almost like a law of the universe. But you can spin it any way you want. And and I think there's going to be some exciting things if this takes off, and there's a lot of different types of assets running around and being issued and used on the Tari network. There's a lot of scope for interesting interactions between them, and the forming of an ecosystem. There's some very exciting possibilities that we've kind of brainstormed about that I think will make this project super exciting if it kind of reaches the potential that we think it can.
Oh, what do you mean, like atomic swaps and things like that, or you're talking about completely different?
I mean, yes, but I mean, you can, for example, think about, well, we're going to have tickets, right, on Tari. Another set of people might say, well, we want to issue digital identity on the Tari digital assets network. I mean, an identity is really a digital asset these days, and then we could go, well, a certain venue that's accepting tickets could say, well, we want to blend these things together so that you need to prove that you're over 21 as well as owning a digital ticket, without revealing any other personal identifying information. And these two assets could be merged together to form a composite asset to say, you can only redeem this ticket if you can prove via cryptographic certificate that you're over 21 and that you own this ticket, and then they can give you entry. These kind of synergies present themselves once you start kind of thinking about the possibilities.
But why is this going to happen on Tari? I mean, there's already 1 million blockchain projects out there. What's the reason? Because it's secured by Monero, which is fungible at the protocol level and kind of one of the, hopefully the truest form of cryptocurrency. Is that a selling point? And then also, I guess, like you were saying, the fact that it's potentially more efficient than something like Ethereum because it's built realizing that not everything needs to be perfectly decentralized for smart contracts? I'm trying to understand why is it going to blossom on Tari versus somewhere else?
I think there's a couple of reasons. I think you're right. The notions of privacy and respecting that and putting privacy back in the hands of individuals is something that a lot of people haven't grasped yet. Obviously, the Monero community understands this very well, but I think the wider public are very blasé about how valuable their privacy is and kind of give it away for free. But hopefully this changes in the future, and that's one driving force. Two of the other things that I think will make me excited about Tari, and the reason why I joined the project, is that we are very focused on user experience and making it useful to an end user. So everything we do is thinking about how is this actually going to work in the real world, 5, 10 years down the line. What do users expect, and what do they want in valuable and useful digital assets? And that thinking also goes into Big Neon, right? So Big Neon is literally the proof of the pudding. If Big Neon doesn't work on Tari, or let me put it the other way, if Big Neon works on Tari, then almost anything will, because there's like literally no worse use case for blockchain than a ticketing application. Because if you think about the demand for tickets, it's zero. Some hot on sale comes on, it's infinite demand, and then it drops off to zero again once the tickets are sold, and then there's another spike when they get redeemed. So you can imagine in blocks, empty blocks, and then massive congestion, and then nothing. Now, we have decided we have to make this work in Tari. So, that's kind of spun all our thinking around, well, obviously we can't put these digital assets on the base layer blockchain. We can't put it on a proof of work blockchain. That just doesn't work fundamentally. So, that's why we have this validator node concept of, it's kind of on a second layer. It's decentralized. We sacrifice decentralization to the point that the digital asset issuer wants, and that enables scale. So we're getting scale and speed from a user perspective. And then you've got this fallback of the security of the base layer blockchain, the proof of work blockchain, in case anything goes wrong. So we're trying to kind of catch the best of both worlds there. So,
Now,
so just to summarize, to answer your question, it's yes, the privacy, user experience, and the fact that we're kind of dog feeding this with Big Neon makes me feel much more optimistic about Tari than a lot of other projects out there.
Okay. I mean, obviously, one of the big criticisms with Monero was when they forked and created Monero Classic, or was that what, yeah, right, back in the day when they had launched the DApp and it failed and people lost money, and then they went back and rolled and forked and essentially changed Ethereum. It was proven that it wasn't decentralized, right? So Vitalik was able to just
you mean Ethereum? The DAO?
Ethereum, yeah, the DAO.
Yeah.
There was the DAO hack, and then Vitalik pretty much single-handedly decided, oh, we have to fork off. And so is that something like that less likely in Tari? Is there anything built into the architecture, or is that really just kind of comes with time and with enough developers joining your open source project? How does that get overcome in Tari?
So one of our philosophies is that we don't allow arbitrary Turing complete smart contracts to be written on the digital assets network. We're following more of a template approach, which means that the actual rules of the smart contracts are sort of almost hard coded into the validator node software. And then a digital asset issuer will select from a pre-selected set of templates. Is it a kind of a ticketing application? Is it a coupon? Is it a kind of collectible asset? And then fill in the metadata and issue the asset in that way. So that means that, first of all, any kind of queries about, well, is that less flexible or whatever? My personal feeling is that the market wants templates, because if you look at a Turing complete smart contract platform like Ethereum, literally every contract out there is either an ERC20 or an ERC720, which are nothing other than templates, right? It's really hard to write smart contracts in Ethereum that aren't like full of holes. And we've seen this time and time again, even like with parity, right? One of the guys who founded Ethereum had some major bugs in his smart contracts, and locked up over $100 million in parity wallets. So we kind of avoid that completely by just saying, right, we're going to give you a pre-selected menu to create issues on, make them as flexible as we need to be. And that also means that asset issuers can issue assets without being developers. It's almost like a drop-down menu, and you can go, oh, right, this fits my bill. I'm going to fill in the details and then click submit, and it'll be created. So the chances of things going wrong are more limited in scope because of that approach. And we also have this idea of being able to version smart contracts, because they're templated and they're not Turing complete, and they're more limited in scope. We have this idea of, if there are any vulnerabilities in the contract, we'll allow asset issuers to opt into upgrading and migrating from one to another without any real issues. So, again, like, we're really focused on user experience, and we think these kind of approaches that we're following that really, tie into that and just make it easy for people to create and issue digital assets that are useful and that people love to use.
Okay, so you're saying it's just the something like the DAO hack isn't as likely on Tari, given its non-Turing completeness. But yeah, I guess the part of the question I was trying to get to is more of the community and its decentralized nature, right? So that was the big criticism with Ethereum. Yes, it perhaps it failed because of its Turing completeness, and it was, you were able to take advantage of that and hack the DAO. But I think that the bigger issue was the fact that the hack was essentially reversed, because the centralized Ethereum community came together and decided to do so. So that's what I was trying to get at with that. But I guess that's not something that.
Well, I mean, like, as I said, the Atari digital asset, the level of decentralization is something the asset issuer will decide on ahead of time. So if they decide to make it run by exactly one validator node, then by definition it's centralized. And if they control that validator node, well, in principle, they could try and do weird things, but the base layer blockchain is going to make sure that they're not breaking any rules. So, at any point in time, there's always this kind of Supreme Court of Appeal called the base layer Tari blockchain that you can appeal to say, look, hang on, this asset issuer or this validator node is kind of stealing coins, or, doing something that's not according to the rules of the smart contract, and we can take action accordingly.
Okay. And I guess the fact that it's backed by Monero and merged mine with Monero also adds additional security there, right? So
that security is feeds into the Tari coin layer. So preventing people, for example, doing a 51% attack and changing or rewriting transactions that have happened on the Mimblewimble layer. So we call the Mimblewimble layer the base layer, and the digital assets network the second layer. But you can think of Monero as almost like a 0th layer above that, where the proof of work is happening. Okay.
So how many coins are going to be issued, and what's like the emission rate? Is it capped? Is it what are the details there?
Yeah, I mean, I can't say right now. It's a bit too early. Ultimately, that needs to be hashed out. We haven't made any final calls on that, but I suspect it'll be similar kind of curve to Monero. I think the Monero model is attractive in many ways. The tail emission basically covers any losses that inevitably happen with people mismanaging private keys and so on. And having this fairly steep, exponential drop off in emission early on means that there's quite a lot of liquidity in the market. And at the beginning, I really don't like what Zcash did, for example, and with their slow ramp up, that meant that there was an incredibly constricted supply in the beginning, which artificially pushed the price to, ridiculous levels. And even Grin, they did the best they could, but I still think having a constant emission like this with a fair amount of hype means there was very little supply in the beginning. And I still believe the Grin price is probably an order of magnitude above its equilibrium price. So it's most likely going to look something like the Monero emission shape, with a lot in the beginning and a tail emission. But beyond that, I can only speculate.
Okay. I guess one of the so that was kind of when we spoke last time, that was kind of a big breakthrough in understanding for me, the fact that it's really it is its own coin. It's merge mined, but it's essentially it's its own project, its own coin. It's not a second layer. But do you see there being any potential? Obviously, smart contracts, so it'll be used for things like that. But could it also play a role in helping Monero scale? Is there any? I know you guys, I think, are working on Lightning, working on Lightning Network as well. Correct me if I'm wrong, and bringing that to Monero. That being a separate thing. But can it help in achieving scale for Monero?
Yeah. So what I think will happen is, because we have such a good relationship between the Tari and the Monero communities, and there's a lot of overlap. I mean, a lot of individuals are in both. Anything interesting that happens in Tari, if it's applicable and if it works in Monero, I certainly see us, bringing that back in. We're working on some interesting things around payment channels. As you said, we have contributed to Rust Lightning project, and we're very focused on getting the Tari testnet and mainnet out at the moment. But I can certainly see in the future us, bringing these two projects even closer together and contributing back in. Even if it's things in like user experience and usability and things like that, which is one of the perhaps more complementary aspects that we're focused on. I don't think it's unfair to say that Monero is still it's not the most user-friendly cryptocurrency out there. Although this is a guy that still uses the CLI for Monero. So, and so, I think that there could well be a lot of give back in sort of usability tools and things in the future. But it's still early days. We'll see what happens.
Okay. And but it being, the atomic swaps, things like that, there's no potential scaling solutions there for Monero. Like, is there? I'm trying to fully understand here.
Look, I mean, off the top of my head, I don't know, but I mean, there will almost certainly be atomic swaps between chains, cross-chain atomic swaps, and Monero is likely going to be one of the first coins that get integrated into Tari for atomic swaps. So that'll be interesting in and of itself. Does it help scale Monero? I'm not so sure, but it's certainly going to be quite cool.
Okay. So since the launch of Grin and I guess Beam, and I don't know if there's other ones as well now using Mimblewimble, have you guys learned anything from those? Because you're actively implementing Mimblewimble now. Are there any lessons to be learned already from the launches of those projects?
Yeah, I mean, we use Grin. Grin's also written in Rust. Tari is written in Rust. So the Grin project is very useful. Certainly, I mean, we've learned a lot from the Grin project, certainly. from a more general Mimblewimble point of view, it's still pretty early in those projects as well. I don't think they've made too many wrong turns. I know Beam had a bit of a slip up in their, they had a vulnerability in their wallet a couple of months ago, and their disclosure process and that might not have been ideal. But I think that kind of thing we already know from Monero. I think we kind of follow many of Monero's policies and norms and ethos in terms of community involvement and responsible disclosure and so on. So if something like that had to happen in Tari, we certainly handle it differently. But so far, there's not a lot of uptake on Grin at the moment, so it's hard to tell how it's scaling and how it's being used. Grin is still a pain in the ass to use. I don't know if you've ever tried to send a Grin transaction. It's still very rough around the edges, and we've taken a very different approach to using and sending Tari amongst users, because we really want to get usability right. Because what you could have this like Ferrari engine inside something that looks completely crap, and no one's going to want to drive it, unless you're a real ideologue. We want to get the Ferrari inside a Ferrari chassis as well. So
forget Lambos. We're moving on to Ferraris.
Have you met Rick? He's a bit of a Ferrari fan.
Nice. So I think we covered it. I just wanted to have you back on because we talked about all these things and the sound wasn't too good. This is great. So how far are you guys? I know I asked you this last time, and that's always a tough question. But when can we expect to see Tari in the wild?
We're working really hard. We're focused on getting testnet out in the not too distant future, so not too much later than early next year. And when that rolls out, hopefully, the hope is that people will start to see what we've been talking about. I mean, in terms of usability and just ease of use, and really kind of starting to paint the picture of like, aha, this is where we're going, and this is what Tari is going to be. So just be patient, hang on for a couple more months, and we're getting there. We're working really hard on getting it out as soon as we can. But you don't want to take chances with financial software, so we're making sure everything is rock solid and safe. And when it comes out, hopefully it'll be something awesome that people really like gravitate to and think yes, and kind of start to see the vision that we've kind of had in our heads for a while, and get really excited about it going forward.
Awesome. I guess one final question. It's kind of a doozy now that I'm thinking about it, but obviously Monero, on this show in particular, right? It's always kind of trying to understand which coin is the closest thing we have to digital cash. That's kind of a big part of my thesis and what I think will be here in the future, and what I think the point of all this cryptocurrency stuff is. Obviously, Bitcoin being the first, it has the network effect, but it also has some major failings, potentially not as decentralized in the long run, lacking the tail emission, so lacking kind of that security aspect, and then obviously the fact that it's not fungible in the core protocol level, and then comparing that to Monero, where it seems to overcome a lot of those shortcomings and really. It really acts like digital cash, or if you want to say essentially digital gold. So, I mean, the thinking is my thinking is like, so a project like Monero really is going to stand the test of time because it's living up to these value propositions, and it's the best tech for that purpose. And it has the community that's trying to constantly develop along those lines and maintain those attributes. So that then compared to something like Tari, where does Tari fall into place? Why does Tari? Why will Tari be here in 30 years? My thinking is Monero will be, because it is digital cash. The world needs digital cash for the internet. Why will Tari kind of stand the test of time and be one of the survivors?
Yeah, I mean, that's the $1 trillion question, right? The winner takes almost everything. I mean,
I'm not saying will it, but why, if it does, why? Like, what's the
yeah? I
you
mean,
know?
I mean, I kind of have the same line of reasoning as you've just spelled out in the question. You know, I'm a huge fan of Bitcoin. My concerns about Bitcoin are similar to yours around fungibility. I'm less concerned about miner centralization. I think in the long run, ASICs will become commoditized, and you know that problem will just solve itself. I think digital cash needs to be much more usable, like instantly usable, than proof of work blockchains currently allow, which makes Lightning very exciting. But I still think that the Lightning Network has certain thorns that need to be worn down. I'm not sure the Lightning developers, I mean, they acknowledge these problems, but I don't know if they acknowledge them or admit to how serious some of these problems that the Lightning Network has are. So I think a digital cash, maybe it's not just one coin to rule them all. I mean, maybe there are several digital gold type coins, and then you atomic swap out into less secure but much more usable and instantly settled coins. You know, so it's kind of like going to your vault, drawing out some cash in your pocket and using that for day-to-day transactions. Maybe that's what the future looks like. And if so, then Tari is probably well placed to sit in that space. Because you know it's designed to be a peer-to-peer value transfer rather than a digital gold. So you know, let's see, 30 years, fingers crossed.
All right. That's great. I think that sums it up right there. Thank you very much. I appreciate you appreciate you doing this again. I know we're on completely different times here.
Yes, you can see the late afternoon sun streaming into my eyes. So.
different times, different seasons. All right, thank you very much. Yeah, I hope to maybe check in with you again. Oh, I guess MoneroCon in Denver. Are you guys going? Is Tari going? Are you going? Any?
We'll see. No plans at this point, but
okay, it's coming up. If you come, definitely stop by. We're throwing a house party. We rented a house in Denver.
Oh wow! Well, in that case,
it's also a place where you could potentially stay if you want. If you need a room, if you're showing up late, we have rooms to stay as well. It should be pretty cool. So it's just going to be Monero people.
Sounds awesome.
Yeah. So thank you. Maybe hope to see you in Denver, and I'll talk to you again.
Yeah, anytime. Cheers, Doug.
So long. Bye.